Andre Whitfield was 41 years old, and he'd spent 6 years quietly building a life he never bragged about. A structural engineer, a private investor, the kind of husband who handled every bill, every deed, every detail, so his wife never had to worry. That Saturday, 40 people packed into his living room for his mother-in-law's birthday. Andre was refilling drinks when his wife Talia's voice cut through the room, cold, rehearsed, telling him to get out of her house, in front of her mother, her brother, every person who'd ever doubted him. She didn't know about the text messages he'd already found, didn't know about the man named Victor coaching her from the shadows, didn't know the deed to that house had never once had her name on it. Andre set down the glass, walked upstairs, and packed a single bag in silence. And as he reached the front door, he turned around and said 6 words that would end everything she thought she'd won. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The table wasn't going to set itself. Andre Whitfield moved through the dining room with the same quiet focus he brought to everything, folding napkins into clean triangles, spacing the wine glasses 2 finger widths from the plate edges, straightening the centerpiece until it sat exactly in the middle. Small things, precise things, the kind of details nobody noticed until they were wrong. From the kitchen came the soft tap of Talia's nails against her phone screen. She'd been in there for 20 minutes. The salmon he'd seasoned was still on the counter, unwrapped. He didn't say anything about it. He went back to the kitchen, washed his hands, and started on the fish himself. Talia was leaning against the counter near the window, her back half turned. She wore a cream blouse and her hair was pressed smooth the way she always did it for family dinners. She looked beautiful. She also hadn't acknowledged him when he walked in. "Your mom texted," he said. "They're 5 minutes out." "Mm-hmm." She kept scrolling. He laid the salmon in the pan and turned the heat to medium. On the counter beside the stove sat a small stack of folders, property tax notices, utility auto-pay confirmations, the HOA renewal he'd handled that morning without being asked. The usual Sunday paperwork that kept their lives running. His handwriting was on all of it. It had always been that way. Talia's family had money, real money, old enough to make them comfortable and new enough to make them proud of it. Odessa Brooks talked about her investments the way some people talked about their children. Preston threw around business ideas like a man who'd never once had to read the fine print. And somewhere along the way, they had all decided, quietly, collectively, without ever saying it out loud, that Andre was the one riding on their good fortune. He had never corrected them. The doorbell rang. Odessa Brooks came in first, the way she always did, like she was arriving at a place that belonged to her. She wore a deep burgundy wrap dress and carried a bottle of wine she hadn't been asked to bring and would mention at least twice. She kissed Talia's cheek and looked around the foyer with the mild expression of a woman taking inventory. "Andre." She said his name the way you'd say fine when someone asked how you were. Technically an answer, not really one. "Odessa," he smiled. "Good to see you. Let me take that." She handed him the wine without looking at him. Preston came in behind her, louder and softer at the same time, broad-shouldered, easy grin, the kind of man who filled a room without adding much to it. He clapped Andre on the arm. "Brother-in-law, smells good in here." He said it like a compliment to the house, not to the man who'd cooked. They settled into the living room while Andre finished in the kitchen. He could hear the conversation shifting without him. Odessa asking Talia about a work event. Preston talking about some property in the East Corridor. Something about investors. When Andre brought out the bread basket and set it on the table, The conversation paused the way a door closes when someone walks in. "I was just telling Talia," Preston said, leaning back in his chair, "that timing is everything in business. You hesitate, the deal dies." He glanced at Andre with a thin smile. "You know how it is." "I do," Andre said simply, and went back to the kitchen. Dinner moved the way these dinners always did. Odessa steering the conversation, Preston filling silences with plans, Talia performing the role of loving wife just well enough. The salmon was good. Andre knew it was good. No one said so. At one point he reached over and touched Talia's shoulder. Just a light touch, the kind that meant nothing and everything at once. She flinched. It was small, just a tightening, a quick pull of her shoulder inward. She covered it by reaching for her water glass. Nobody else saw it. Andre saw it. 20 minutes later, her phone buzzed and she was on her feet before the second vibration. "I have to grab this," she said, already moving toward the hallway. "Work thing." She was gone for 11 minutes. He counted. When she came back, she sat down with a smile that didn't reach her eyes and refilled her wine. Her jaw was set in a way that meant she was controlling something, keeping something flat and still beneath the surface. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Fine," she said. "Just a deadline thing." Odessa changed the subject. Preston ate. The dinner ended. By 10 o'clock, the house was quiet. Odessa and Preston were gone. Talia said she was tired and went upstairs without much more than that. Andre cleaned the kitchen, filed the HOA paperwork in the cabinet labeled House, Active, and made himself a cup of coffee he didn't really want. Then he walked down the hall to his home office. The room was small and orderly, bookshelves along one wall, a drafting table he rarely used anymore, his desktop in the corner. He needed the tax files from 2 years back. Routine? Took him all of 3 minutes to find them. It was when he turned to leave that he noticed it. Talia's laptop. Still open on the edge of his desk, where she must have left it that afternoon. The screen had dimmed but not gone dark. He reached over to close it and stopped. On the desktop, between a folder of work presentations and the recycling bin, sat an icon he didn't recognize. A plain folder. No image. Just a name. Personal. The cursor blinked. Andre hadn't moved in almost a full minute. His hand rested on the touchpad, one finger light against the surface. The office was quiet. The house was quiet. Upstairs, he could hear nothing, just the faint hum of the HVAC system cycling on, then off. He opened the folder. There were 14 files inside. He didn't open them all at once. He started with the first one, a PDF, no title, just a date string in the file name. He clicked it. A hotel receipt, the Grand Meridian, downtown, 2 nights, King Suite, $487 a night. The name on the bill was T. Whitfield. The date was 8 months ago, almost to the week. He sat back slightly. Not all the way, just enough. The next file was similar. Different hotel, same city. A Thursday and Friday in October. Then another in November. He opened them one by one, slowly, the way you test ice before you step onto it. 7 receipts in total, spread across 8 months, with a patience that almost looked planned, because it was planned. The 8th file was a phone bill. Not their joint plan, a separate account. A carrier he didn't recognize, opened under Talia's name at an address that wasn't their house. A P.O. box in the east side of the city. The monthly charges were low. Just one line. A second phone nobody was supposed to know about. He stared at the P.O. box address for a long moment. Then he opened the last folder. It was a screenshot. Or rather, a series of them. A text thread. Exported somehow and saved as image files. The contact at the top was labeled simply V. He read slowly. The messages were not ambiguous. They were warm in the way that made his stomach go cold. Lowercase letters, inside jokes he didn't understand. The easy shorthand of two people who had been talking long enough to stop being careful. There was a message from 4 months ago that said, "You know this is real, right? This isn't just a thing." There was one from 2 months ago that said, "Once the house situation is settled, we can actually make this permanent. I'm not worried. Once the house situation is settled." He read that line twice. He read it a third time. He closed the screenshot. He closed the folder. He sat in the blue-gray light of the dimmed screen and let the silence do what silence does. The first feeling was not anger. It wasn't even pain exactly. It was the feeling of a structure shifting, the way a building sounds when something deep in its frame gives way. Not a collapse, just a sound, a settling. And then, he had built a lot of things in his life. He understood that the visible damage always came after the hidden failure. The crack in the wall was never where the problem started. He gave himself 3 minutes. He'd learned a long time ago that 3 minutes of stillness was enough to keep him from doing something irreversible. He used them. Then he opened his own external hard drive, a small black one he kept in the top right drawer, and he copied every file in Talia's folder, all 14. He dragged them across, watched the progress bar move, and when it was done, he ejected the drive and put it back in the drawer. He closed Talia's laptop and set it exactly where he'd found it. Same angle, same position. He was thorough that way. He did not go upstairs angry. He did not go upstairs with clenched fists or a tight jaw, or any of the other things a man might do when his world has just rearranged itself without permission. He went upstairs the way he'd come down, quietly, in the dark, one hand trailing the banister. Talia was asleep, or she looked like she was. She lay on her side, facing away from him, one arm tucked under the pillow, her breathing slow and even. The room smelled like her lotion, something with jasmine in it. He'd always liked it. He didn't look at her for long. He lay down on his side of the bed, on his back, and stared at the ceiling. Once the house situation is settled. He thought about that line. He thought about what it implied. Not just an affair, but a plan attached to it. A timeline. A destination. Someone had told her something, or promised her something, and she had believed it enough to save the receipts in a folder and leave that folder on a laptop she carried through his house. She thought he wouldn't look. She thought there was nothing to find. He almost understood it. He'd spent 15 years being the man in the background, the one who handled the paperwork, paid the bills, kept things running. The invisible architecture holding everything up. Why would someone like that ever become a threat? That was the mistake. He needed to call Yvonne in the morning, not yet to fight, just to see, just to understand the full shape of what he was standing in before he took a single step. He closed his eyes. Beside him, Talia slept without moving. He was up before 6. Talia never stirred before 7:30 on a Monday. He knew her schedule the way he knew load tolerances, precisely from years of observation. He had a window. He went downstairs in the gray early light, started the coffee, and stood at the kitchen window while it brewed. The backyard was still. The oak tree at the far end of the property had lost most of its leaves. They lay flat and dark against the wet grass. He picked up his phone and called Yvonne. She answered on the second ring. "You're calling me before 6 in the morning." Her voice was alert, not groggy. Yvonne Marsh had never once sounded caught off guard. "This isn't a social call." "No," he said, "it's not." He kept his voice low and even. He didn't tell her everything, not yet. He told her enough. He asked her to pull the property records on the house, quietly, just to review the ownership structure, the deed, how it was all set up. A formality, he called it. There was a short pause on the other end. Andre. Her tone shifted, not alarmed but precise. You remember the trust arrangement you set up about 6 years ago? Generally. When you're ready to have the full conversation, call me back. She paused again. But I'll tell you this much right now. That ownership structure protects you a lot more than you probably remember. I'll pull everything and confirm the details. Give me a day. He nodded, even though she couldn't see him. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, she said. Call me when you're ready to talk for real. She hung up. He poured his coffee and stood there, holding it with both hands. The day passed the way days do when you are watching something you can't yet say out loud. He went to work. He reviewed structural load calculations for a commercial project in the East Corridor. He ate lunch at his desk. He was productive in the mechanical way of a man whose mind is working on 2 things at once. He came home to find Talia already back, changed into weekend clothes even though it was a weekday, moving around the kitchen with the practiced ease of someone who had decided to perform normalcy. How was your day? She asked. Fine, he said. Busy. He set his bag down and loosened his collar, and after a few minutes, when the moment felt natural, he said it. I've been thinking about simplifying our finances. He said it casually, the way you'd mention the weather. Streamlining some of the joint accounts, just cleaning things up. He watched her. She had been slicing a bell pepper. The knife slowed. What does that mean exactly? Her voice stayed level, but something behind it went tight. Nothing specific yet, he said. Just thinking about it. Things get complicated over time. She set the knife down and turned to face him. The look on her face was not concern. It was calculation dressed up as annoyance. You always do this, she said. You make these vague comments and then act like I'm supposed to know what you're talking about. I'm just thinking out loud. Well, don't. She turned back to the cutting board. Our finances are fine. I don't see why you'd want to mess with anything. He said nothing else. He didn't need to. It was later that evening, just past 9, when he heard them. He had come down the hallway toward the kitchen to refill his water glass. The light in the living room was off. Talia was near the back staircase, her voice low, her phone pressed to her ear. But then he realized it wasn't the phone. Preston was there. He must have come through the side door. Andre stopped just before the hallway opened into the room. He stayed in the shadow near the wall. Preston's voice came first, quiet but impatient. Is it handled yet? Talia's answer was swift and hushed. Stop, not here. A pause. He heard the quick sound of her moving, checking the room, maybe the stairs. I said I'm working on it. You've been saying that. Preston. Her voice dropped even further. I said I'm handling it. He waited a beat longer. Then he turned around and walked back down the hall the way he came, silently, without a glass of water. He sat at his desk in the dark and added it to the list of things he knew. The phone rang around 10. Talia answered it in the bedroom, and he could hear the tone of her voice shift from flat to warm the way a lamp flickers on. She laughed once, then twice. She came out of the bedroom smiling. That was Mama, she said. Her birthday dinner. She wants to do it here, at the house. That's fine, he said. She nodded, already moving on, already thinking past him. She picked up her own water glass from the counter, and just before she headed back to the bedroom, she glanced over her shoulder. It'll be a good chance for everyone to be together, she said. Her tone was light, almost sweet, but There was something underneath it, something pointed, like she was already seeing a version of that night that he wasn't. The house looked good that night. It always did when Talia put her mind to it. She had spent the afternoon arranging flowers on the dining table, adjusting the lighting, shifting picture frames a half-inch left or right, until the whole room looked like something out of a catalogue. Andre had handled the food order, 2 catered trays from the restaurant on Millbrook, the one Odessa liked. He carried them in without being asked, and set them up in the kitchen while Talia circled the living room one more time, satisfied. By 7 o'clock, the house was full. Extended family moved in clusters, cousins near the fireplace, an aunt seated early at the table with a plate already in front of her. Odessa's friends from church took up the corner near the window. Someone had connected a phone to the Bluetooth speaker, and old R&B floated through the rooms at a respectful volume. There was laughter. There was the warm, close smell of food and perfume, and too many coats piled on the bench by the door. Andre moved through it all the way he usually did at these things. Quietly, refilling drinks when glasses ran low, answering when spoken to, not inserting himself into conversations that didn't need him. He shook hands. He smiled when it was called for. A cousin he hadn't seen in a year clapped him on the shoulder and said he looked good, and he said thanks and meant it. Odessa arrived at the table with the slow, deliberate energy of a woman who expected the room to notice. She hugged Talia long and close, whispered something against her ear. When she turned to Andre, she patted his arm once, the way you'd pat a table you were checking for dust. "Everything looks wonderful," she said, to no one in particular. It happened about an hour in. The food had been served. The noise in the room had settled into the comfortable low hum of people who had eaten and were starting to slow down. Andre was standing near the edge of the dining room, talking with one of Odessa's neighbors about nothing. Something about traffic on Route 9, something about the weather turning. He heard Talia's voice shift. Not louder, just different. The way a room sounds different when someone opens a window in winter. Sharp and deliberate. "You know what?" she said. He looked up. She was standing in the middle of the living room. Her arms were loose at her sides, but her jaw was set. Most of the room could see her. "I'm tired," she said. "I've been tired for a long time, and I think everyone here already knows why." The neighbor beside him stopped talking. The room went quieter in pieces, conversation by conversation, until there was nothing but the music, and then someone must have turned that down too, because now there was nothing. Talia looked at Andre directly. "You've controlled everything in this house since day one. The money, the decisions, all of it. And you've kept me in the dark like I don't have a say in my own life." Her voice was steady. She had practiced this. "I built this life. My family built this life. And I'm done pretending you belong here the way you think you do." Odessa moved forward from the corner where she'd been standing. "That's right," she said, loud enough for the whole room. "She has been carrying this family. Everyone here knows it." Preston was near the hallway. He didn't step forward, but he said it low and clear enough. "Man never really belonged here anyway." The room sat completely still. Some people looked at their plates. An aunt near the window had her hand over her mouth. Talia pointed toward the door. "I want you out of my house, Andre." He looked at her for a moment, not with anger, not with hurt, or at least nothing he let cross his face. He looked at her the way he looked at a structural drawing when something didn't add up, carefully, clearly, without rushing. Then he turned and went upstairs. The room didn't breathe. He was up there maybe 7 minutes. He came back down carrying one bag, a canvas duffel he used for work trips. His coat was over his arm. He walked through the living room without looking left or right, past the table, past the cousins who had gone rigid and silent, past Odessa, who was watching him with her chin raised. He stopped at the front door. He set his hand on the frame and turned back, just once, and looked at Talia. "You should check the deed," he said quietly, "before you get comfortable." He said it the way you'd leave a note on someone's desk. Simple, calm, like it was just a piece of information they might find useful later. Then he opened the door and walked out. He didn't turn the radio on. He drove through the dark neighborhood streets with both hands on the wheel, the houses sliding past one by one, their windows lit and warm. He exhaled once, slow and full, and rolled his shoulders back. His phone was in his pocket. He would call Ivan in the morning. He drove. Ivan's office was on the 4th floor of a building downtown, the kind of building that was old enough to have character but clean enough to mean business. Dark wood trim, a receptionist who smiled and asked for nothing. The hallway smelled like coffee and printer paper. Andrei arrived at 8:50. The meeting was at 9. He sat in the waiting area for a few minutes, coat folded across his lap, watching the street through the tall window beside him. The city was moving. People with coffee cups, a delivery truck with its hazards blinking. Everything going about its normal Tuesday morning like nothing had happened. He thought about the expression on Talia's face when he'd said it. "You should check the deed." She hadn't understood it right away. He'd seen that. Her brow had pulled together for just a second. Not anger, not recognition, just confusion. The confusion of someone who had been certain about something, and suddenly wasn't. Good. "Andrei!" He looked up. Ivan was in the doorway. She was dressed the way she always was for office days. Sharp blazer, no nonsense, reading glasses pushed up on her head. She had a folder tucked under her arm, and a look on her face that meant she was already working. "Come on back," she said. Her office was organized the way her mind worked. Everything in its place, everything labeled. She had 2 monitors, a whiteboard with color-coded notes along the left edge, and a framed quote on the wall that Andrei had never bothered to read. She pulled the folder from under her arm and laid it flat on the desk between them before she even sat down. "Let's go through it," she said. He nodded. She opened the folder and turned the first page toward him. A property record. The Whitfield home on Carver Lane, address he knew by heart, had driven down thousands of times, had watched from above on a blueprint before a single wall went up. 6 years ago, she said, tapping the page, you came to me because Talia's brother had run his second business into the ground and creditors were circling. You remember? I remember. His debts weren't Talia's directly, but he'd borrowed against relationships inside the family. Odessa had co-signed on something. There was real risk of financial bleed-over, and Talia was scared. She paused. She asked you to handle it. She said she didn't want to think about the numbers, Andrei said. Told me to do whatever I needed to do to protect the house. Right. Ivan nodded once. So you did. She turned another page. A trust document. Andrei's name ran through it like a thread, clean, unbroken, sole beneficiary and trustee. You structured the purchase of the marital home through a private revocable trust, she said. Andrei D. Whitfield, sole trustee. The property was bought outright. No mortgage, no joint ownership, no co-title of any kind. She let that sit for a second. Talia signed the closing documents. She didn't read them, Andrei said. She did not, Ivan confirmed. She signed 3 places where I would have spent 45 minutes reading. But the signatures are there, witnessed and notarized. She trusted you. A pause. Which is its own kind of irony, I suppose. Andrei looked at the document. He had known this was coming, had suspected it since Ivan's offhand comment days ago on the phone. But seeing it laid out like this, clean and official and inarguable, was different from suspecting it. The house was his, had been his for 6 years. While Talia had been building resentment, building excuses, building an exit, she thought she'd already won. He had owned every square foot of it. The walls he'd helped design, the floors he'd picked, the kitchen window he'd repositioned 6 inches to catch the morning light better. His. He didn't feel like celebrating. It wasn't that kind of thing. It was quieter than that. The feeling of looking back at a long road and realizing the ground had been solid the whole time, even on the days it hadn't felt like it. "She has no legal claim," Yvonne said. "Not to the property, not to the trust. If she retained an attorney tomorrow morning and filed by noon, she would get the same answer every time she asked." She closed that section of the folder. "It's clean, Andre. You're protected." He nodded slowly. "Okay." Yvonne studied him for a second. She'd known him long enough not to expect a different reaction. She pulled the folder forward again and flipped to a section near the back. Her expression shifted just slightly, still composed, but something more careful in it now. "During the records pull," she said, "I noticed some movement in your joint accounts. Activity that caught my eye." She looked at him directly. "I didn't dig further without your permission. That's a different conversation." Andre was quiet for a moment. "How much movement?" he asked. "Enough that I want to look closer before I tell you what I think it means," she said. "I'd rather show you the full picture than half of it." He sat back in the chair. Outside the window, the city kept moving. "Pull everything," he said. 2 days later, Andre was back. Same chair, same view of the street. But Yvonne's desk looked different this time, less like a workstation and more like a war room. Papers spread in a loose grid, highlighted rows, a yellow legal pad with her handwriting running down the left margin in tight, even lines. She didn't offer coffee. She just nodded at the chair and started talking. "Sit down," she said. "There's a lot." She started with the numbers. The joint savings account, the one Andre and Talia had held together since the 2nd year of their marriage, had been steady for a long time. Regular deposits, regular expenses, nothing unusual. But Yvonne had pulled the full transaction history going back 14 months, and somewhere around the 10-month mark, a pattern appeared. Small transfers at first, 400 here, 800 there, always on a Thursday, always to the same external account, a private account, no joint holder, opened in Talia's name only. Then the amounts climbed. "She got bolder as the months went on," Yvonne said. She turned a page and slid it across the desk. Rows of numbers, dates, amounts. The later transfers were in the thousands, 12,000 in 1 week, in March alone. Andre looked at the page. He didn't flinch. He just looked at it the way he looked at a structural diagram, searching for the logic, the load, the point where everything connected. "Total?" he asked. $143,000, Yvonne said. "Over 7 months." The number landed in the room like something heavy dropped on hardwood. $143,000. Money they had built together over years, careful budgeting, deferred vacations, 1,000 small decisions to save rather than spend. Gone in pieces, moved quietly, while she smiled at dinner and asked him how his day was. He set the page down. "She was building a floor under herself," he said. "That's exactly what she was doing," Yvonne agreed. "She wasn't leaving on impulse. She planned this, kept the house, pushed you out, walked away with savings you didn't know she'd already taken. The whole thing was designed to leave you with nothing she hadn't already removed." Andre nodded slowly. He didn't say anything for a moment. The thing about betrayal, he had learned, was that the first layer of it was always the most personal. The affair, the coldness, the way she'd looked at him at that dinner table like he was something she'd already decided to leave behind. That part hurt in a way that lived in the chest, not the head. But the second layer, the calculated, premeditated financial stripping of everything he'd helped build, that was different. That didn't just hurt. That clarified things. It took the last corner of doubt and folded it flat. "What else?" he said. Yvonne pulled another page forward. "Odessa Brooks," she said. "Approximately 6 weeks ago, she took out a personal loan against her retirement savings, $70,000. She used a lender she's worked with before. I found the inquiry through a credit report cross-check." She paused. "She co-signed it with a promissory structure that assumes repayment through a significant asset transfer. Language is vague, but the timing isn't." Andre looked up. "She borrowed against her retirement." "Against her retirement," Yvonne repeated, "based, I believe, on Talia's assurance that the house would be hers within the month." He sat with that. Odessa Brooks, who had looked at him across dinner tables for years with barely disguised contempt, who had called him too quiet, too stiff, never said it plainly, but made sure he always felt it, had staked her own financial security on a house she had no idea she'd never touch. "Preston?" he asked. Yvonne flipped to the next page. "Lease deposit on a commercial property in Midtown, $22,000, signed 8 days ago. 3-year lease contingent on full execution. He used a business account with almost nothing in it." She looked at him. "He funded it with a wire from Odessa." Andre leaned back in his chair. So that was the full picture. Talia had been siphoning the savings. Odessa had borrowed against her retirement. Preston had spent money he didn't have on a business that needed the house as its foundation. 3 people, 3 separate gambles, all stacked on top of each other, all balanced on the assumption that Talia owned something she had never owned. Not for a single day. The whole thing was like a building with no footings. It had looked solid from the outside, but the ground beneath it had never been theirs. "I want all of it documented," Andre said. "Every transfer, every date, every dollar, the loan, the lease, everything, organized and clean." "Already being prepared," Yvonne said. "You'll have a full package before the week is out." He nodded. Then he was quiet for a moment, looking at the papers spread across her desk. "There's something else," he said. "The man in those messages. Victor." He folded his hands once in his lap. "His interest in all of this doesn't feel like romance to me. It feels like a transaction." Yvonne looked at him steadily. "I want to know who he is," Andre said. "What he does, whether Talia is the first." Yvonne reached to the side of her desk and opened a new manila folder. "Give me a few days," she said. 3 days later, Yvonne didn't even wait for him to sit down. She had the folder open before he reached the chair. Thicker than the last one. More pages, more tabs, a printed photograph clipped to the inside cover. Andre sat, looked at the photo, and felt something cold move through him. Not surprise, exactly, but confirmation. The man in the picture was polished. Good suit, easy smile, the kind of face that looked like it had never been told no. Victor Sinclair, Yvonne said, 40 years old, licensed real estate consultant, works independently, no firm, and he has been very, very busy. She laid it out the way she always did, methodically, without editorializing, letting the facts carry their own weight. Victor had pulled a property record search on the Whitfield house 11 months ago. Yvonne had found it buried in a routine title activity log, the kind of record that most people never thought to check. He'd accessed comparable sales data for the neighborhood around the same time. Done his math quietly. The Whitfield home sat in one of the fastest appreciating zip codes in the county, and based on current market conditions, it was undervalued by somewhere between $60,000 and $90,000. He spotted it like a target, Yvonne said, before Talia even knew she was being used as the vehicle. Andre looked at the records. The dates were right there in black and white. Victor had been circling the house for almost a year. The affair had started 8 months ago, according to the text thread Andre found on Talia's laptop, which meant Victor had spent 3 months studying the property before he ever introduced himself to Talia. He knew what he wanted first, Andre said. Then he found his way in. "That's how it looks," Yvonne said, "and it gets more specific." She pulled a second page forward. Yvonne obtained a copy of a private consulting agreement, filed carelessly in Victor's cloud storage backup, accessible through a linked business email that wasn't properly secured. She tapped the page. "It's a profit-sharing arrangement. Talia's signature is on it." Andre stared at it. The document was only half a page long, written in plain language that tried to sound casual and professional at the same time. Upon successful transfer and listing of the residential property at the above address, net proceeds to be divided as follows. Talia's cut, Victor's cut. Clean as a contract between business partners, because that's all it ever was. "She signed this," Andre said. It wasn't a question. "She signed it," Yvonne confirmed. 7 months ago, 1 month into the affair. Andre set the page down. He thought about the way Talia had looked at him across that dinner table, the coldness, the contempt she'd dressed up as frustration. He had spent weeks wondering how long she had actually stopped caring about the marriage. Now he had a clearer answer. She hadn't stopped caring. She'd simply replaced the marriage with something more useful to her. A transaction. A plan. Victor had handed her a story she could live inside. You deserve more. You built this. He was never enough. And she had taken it because it gave her permission. It didn't make it hurt less, but it made it simpler. "What about before this?" Andre asked. "You said you'd look into his history." Yvonne closed the first folder and opened a second one. "He did this before," she said. "Different state. Different woman. Her name was Renata Osei. She was 44, a schoolteacher, divorced 3 years ago after a marriage that collapsed, in a way she still didn't fully understand, until it was already over. Victor had come into her life during a period when her marriage was rocky, not yet broken, just strained. He had been charming and attentive, and she had believed he cared about her. By the time the divorce was finalized, she had lost the house and most of her savings. Her ex-husband, who had also been manipulated by Victor in a separate financial arrangement, ended up with almost nothing either. Victor had walked away with his consulting fee and moved on. She filed a licensing complaint with the state board, Yvonne said, 18 months ago. It's been sitting in review ever since. She paused. Stalled for lack of a second corroborating witness. Without someone else who experienced the same pattern, the board can't establish that this is a recurring practice versus an isolated dispute. Andre sat very still. "How close is she to giving up on it?" he asked. "Close," Yvonne said. "I got that from a contact familiar with the case. She's been asked twice to provide additional documentation. She doesn't have it. What she has is her account, and her account alone." Andre was quiet for a moment. Outside, a city bus rolled past the window. A horn sounded somewhere below. "Reach out to her," he said. Carefully. Not to pressure her, just to let her know a second case exists. That someone else saw the same pattern. That she's not alone in this anymore. Yvonne looked at him and gave a single deliberate nod. "I'll make contact this week," she said. If what we have here lines up with what she experienced, this could be the piece that puts Victor's entire history into the light. The words had stayed with Talia all night. You should check the deed before you get comfortable. She hadn't slept. Not really. She'd lain in the center of the bed. Their bed, her bed, whatever it was now, staring at the ceiling and turning those 9 words over and over in her head like a stone she couldn't put down. She'd told herself it was a bluff. Andre being dramatic on his way out the door, trying to land one last line before the silence swallowed him. But she hadn't been able to make herself believe it. By Tuesday morning, she was sitting at the kitchen table with her second cup of coffee gone cold, and Preston was already on his way over. She hadn't told him everything. Just enough. Andre said something about the deed. Can you go check it for me? I need to see it in writing. Preston had waved it off over the phone, that easy dismissal he always reached for when he didn't want to think too hard about something uncomfortable. Talia, the house is yours. You've lived there for 11 years. Calm down. But he'd gone anyway. She knew he would. Preston had his own reasons for needing this settled. She heard his car in the driveway just before noon. The front door opened. She stood up from the couch before he even made it through the hallway. He was holding a manila envelope. The county seal was printed in the upper left corner. His face was wrong. That was the first thing she noticed. His face. Preston almost never looked unsure. He moved through the world with the specific confidence of a man who had failed repeatedly and learned nothing from it. But right now, standing in the doorway of the living room with that envelope in his hand, he looked like a man who had just been handed news he didn't know how to carry. Preston. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. What does it say? He set the envelope on the coffee table. Didn't hand it to her. Set it down like he needed the distance. The house is in a trust, he said. Okay. She swallowed. Okay, so whose trust? Preston looked at her. Andre's. It's been his, solely his, for 6 years, Talia. His name alone. You're not on the deed. You're not on the trust. There's nothing with your name on this property anywhere. The room didn't spin. It just went very, very quiet. Talia picked up the envelope, pulled out the pages, read the same paragraph 3 times because the first 2 times her brain simply refused to process the language as real. The trust name, the date of transfer, Andre's name, singular, unambiguous, sealed and recorded with the county 6 years ago. Her signature was in there too, near the back, on a document she had signed without reading because Andre had asked her to and she had trusted him to handle it, the way she always asked him to handle things she didn't want to deal with. She had signed her own name off the property and never known it. Odessa arrived within the hour. Talia hadn't even called her. Preston had. She came through the front door with her coat still on and her reading glasses already in her hand, and Preston walked her through it in under 3 minutes while Talia sat on the couch and said nothing. Odessa read the document, read it again. Then she set it down and looked at Talia with an expression that wasn't sympathy. It was panic, dressed up as fury. You need to fix this, Odessa said. Right now, today. Mama, I don't know how to. I co-signed a loan, Odessa said, her voice dropping to something sharp and thin. I put my retirement savings on the line because you told me this was going to work out. Because you told me this house was yours. She tapped the document on the table. If that house doesn't transfer, I am exposed, Talia. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Talia understood. Preston was pacing the length of the room now, his hand pressed to the back of his neck. I put down a deposit on that lease, non-refundable. I fronted money I don't have yet, because the whole plan was that Talia would have access to the equity within. He stopped, pressed his lips together. I need that money back, Talia. I need this fixed. The room felt like it was closing in from all three sides at once. Talia picked up her phone, found Andrei's name in her contacts. Her thumb hovered over the call button for just a second. Then she pressed it. It rang 4 times before he answered. Andrei. She kept her voice even, careful. We need to talk. I figured you'd call, he said. He sounded the way he always sounded. Calm, almost mild, like he was in the middle of something and had simply set it down to answer her. It infuriated her. She pushed it down. Can we meet? She asked. At the house, with everyone there. I think we all need to sit down together and figure out how to move forward. She softened her voice at the end. I think we can work this out, Andrei. I really do. A short pause. Sure, he said. Saturday, 7 o'clock. Okay, she exhaled. Okay, yes, Saturday. I'll be there, he said, and hung up. Talia set the phone down on the coffee table next to the deed and looked across at her mother and her brother, relief spreading slowly through her chest. He'd agreed. He was coming. That meant there was still room to maneuver, still a chance to salvage something from this before it all came completely apart. The living room looked exactly the same. Same cream-colored walls, same dark wood coffee table, same framed family photos lined up along the mantel like a row of small, silent witnesses. Someone had straightened the throw pillows on the couch. Talia probably, nervous energy finding its outlet in small, controllable things. Odessa sat in the armchair nearest the fireplace, her reading glasses folded in her lap, her back very straight. She had dressed up slightly, as if formality might give her leverage. Preston stood near the window with his arms crossed, pretending to look calm. He wasn't. Talia perched on the edge of the couch, her hands wrapped around a mug she hadn't drunk from. She was watching the front door. They all were. The bell rang at exactly 7 o'clock. Talia stood up too quickly, smoothed her blouse, walked to the door and opened it, already building her expression into something composed and reasonable. Andrei stood on the front step. He was dressed simply, dark slacks, a gray button-down. No tie, no performance, just clean and unhurried, the way he always looked when he'd already decided how something was going to go. Beside him stood a woman Talia didn't recognize. She was trim and composed, carrying a leather portfolio under one arm and a second thicker folder in her hand. She looked at Talia the way a person looks at a door they're about to walk through. Talia, Andrei said. His voice was mild. This is Ivan Marsh, my attorney. Something cold moved through Talia's chest. She stepped back. They came inside. Ivan didn't sit down right away. She set her portfolio on the coffee table with quiet precision, unzipped it, and began laying out documents in a neat row without rushing or explaining herself yet, just placing each page down in its order. Methodical, like she'd done this many times before. Odessa's eyes tracked every sheet of paper. Preston uncrossed his arms. Andrei sat down in the chair across from the couch, the same chair he'd always sat in at the end of every family dinner. He looked around the room once, unhurried, and then he looked at Talia. I'll keep this simple, he said. There's no point in making it longer than it needs to be. Talia opened her mouth. Andrei continued. The house. He nodded toward one of the documents. You've already seen the deed, so you know it's mine. Has been mine solely through the Whitfield Family Trust for 6 years. Yvonne filed the original transfer. She has every record. He paused. That's not a negotiation point, it's just a fact. Odessa drew a slow breath through her nose. Her jaw was tight. The second thing, Andrei said, and Yvonne slid a second set of documents forward, is the money. Talia's hand tightened around her mug. $142,000, Andrei said, moved out of our joint savings account over the last 7 months into a private account in your name alone." He said it without heat, without accusation in his voice, just plainly, the way you'd read a number off a page. "Yvonne has the transfer records, the dates, and the account routing information. All of it." The room was absolutely silent. Preston looked at Talia. Talia was staring at the coffee table. Odessa's face had changed. The sharp, controlled expression she'd walked in with was dissolving at the edges, replaced by something softer and more frightened. "And the third thing," Andrei said, "is Victor." He said the name without any particular weight, just said it. Yvonne set down a third folder. This one was thicker than the others. "Victor Sinclair isn't a man who fell in love with your daughter," Andrei said, looking at Odessa directly for the first time. "He's a licensed real estate consultant who identified this house as undervalued 8 months ago. He built a relationship with Talia because he needed someone on the inside of the marriage. He had a private agreement with her to broker the sale once she gained control of the property and split the proceeds." Andrei let that land. The affair was the strategy, not the point. Odessa's mouth opened slightly. Nothing came out. "He's done it before," Andrei continued. "A woman named Denise Calhoun in Georgia. Victor engineered a near-identical situation, got close to her during her divorce, maneuvered her out of her own home, and walked away with his commission while she lost everything." He glanced down at the folder. She filed a licensing complaint against him. It stalled because she had no corroborating witness. He looked up. "She has one now. Yvonne reached out to her last week. She's agreed to formally corroborate, and the licensing board has been notified." Preston sat down heavily on the arm of the couch, like his legs had made a decision without asking him first. Talia finally looked up. Her eyes were glassy, but she wasn't crying. She looked like someone standing in a room after an explosion, still registering what was no longer there. She had no rebuttal. There was nothing to say that the documents hadn't already said louder. Odessa looked down at the loan papers she'd brought in her own purse, the ones she'd been gripping like a talisman all evening, and, for the first time, she didn't look like a woman in charge of a room. She looked like a woman who had bet everything on someone else's plan, and only now understood the plan had never been sound. Preston said nothing. He just stared at the floor, doing the math he didn't want to finish. Andrei stood. Yvonne collected the documents with the same quiet efficiency she'd used to lay them out, slid them back into the portfolio, and zipped it closed. Andrei looked at the room one last time. Not with anger, not with satisfaction exactly, with something quieter than either of those things. Then he walked to the front door, held it open for Yvonne, and stepped out into the cool night air. The door clicked shut behind them. Inside, no one spoke. Andrei filed the divorce papers on a Tuesday morning. No drama, no announcement. He walked into the county courthouse with Yvonne at 9 o'clock, handed over the paperwork at the clerk's window, and was back in his car by 9:45. He stopped for coffee on the way home. The filing cited financial misconduct, specifically the $142,000 Talia had moved out of their joint accounts. Yvonne had documented every transfer with surgical precision, each one dated and sourced and tied to Talia's private account. It was airtight, and because the house was already solely Andrei's, the financial misconduct filing gave him a stronger position over everything that remained. The joint investment accounts, the vehicles, the remaining savings. Everything Talia had assumed would soften her landing was now in question. Yvonne told him the opposing attorney called within 48 hours. Andrei told her to handle it. Victor Sinclair's suspension came through 2 weeks later. The Georgia Licensing Board received the corroborating statement from Denise Calhoun. with a second complainant describing the same pattern, the manufactured relationship, the property maneuvering, the engineered divorce, the board opened a formal investigation and notified Victor's brokerage the same day. The brokerage suspended him pending review. Standard procedure. Routine, even. But routine was enough. The deal Victor had spent 8 months building, the careful positioning, the coaching, the patience of a man who thought he was the only one playing a long game, evaporated the moment the suspension hit. There was no house to broker. There had never been a house to broker. The property he'd identified, cultivated, and circled like it was already his, had been held in Andre's trust for 6 years. Victor had spent nearly a year working an angle on something he could never have touched. Andre heard about the suspension through Yvonne. He didn't celebrate. He just nodded and moved on. The Brooks family came apart more slowly and more painfully. Odessa's loan didn't disappear because the plan did. The bank still wanted its money. She had co-signed against her own retirement savings, real money, years of it, based on the certainty that Talia would control the house and its equity within weeks. That certainty was gone. What remained was a debt she hadn't expected to carry alone, and a phone that rang less and less as her children turned their grief into blame. She had never approved of Andre, had said so in small ways and large ones for 15 years. She'd been so sure she was protecting her daughter, so sure she understood the situation better than anyone else in the room. The loan paperwork sat on her kitchen table for 3 weeks before she called her financial advisor. Preston's deposit was simply gone. The lease on the new business space required a non-refundable payment to hold the unit, money he'd fronted confidently, certain the house equity was coming. When it didn't, the landlord moved on to another tenant. Preston was left owing money he'd already spent on a venture that never opened its doors, built on a foundation that was never his to stand on. He stopped returning Talia's calls sometime around the 6th week. Talia's family had always moved as a unit. They'd always had someone else to blame when things went wrong. But this time, the wreckage was too evenly distributed, and the blame had nowhere clean to land except inward. The conversations turned sharp. Then they stopped entirely. The misappropriated funds remained frozen pending the divorce proceedings. The house was already gone. It had never been hers. And the family she'd expected to stand behind her was now fractured in ways that had nothing to do with Andre, and everything to do with what they'd all chosen to do without him. 18 months passed. Andre's new place was smaller, a 2-bedroom craftsman on a quiet street, with good bones and better light. He'd done most of the renovation work himself on weekends, the same way he'd designed the custom built-ins in the old house years ago. New floors, a kitchen he'd planned from scratch, a back porch where he drank his coffee in the mornings and didn't have to explain himself to anyone. His investment portfolio had kept growing through all of it, steady and patient the way he'd built it to be. He didn't have to tell anyone. He never had. The new relationship had come slowly, the way good things tend to. She was an architect, thoughtful and straightforward, who laughed at his dry humor and didn't need to fill every silence. They'd been together 8 months. It felt different from the start, lighter, and somehow more solid at the same time. He saw Talia at the grocery store on a Saturday morning in early spring. She was in the cereal aisle, studying the back of a box with the focused look of someone trying very hard to seem occupied. She'd lost weight. Her clothes were neat but plain, nothing like the curated presentation she'd always moved through the world in. She looked tired in the particular way that long hours leave on a person, not sad, exactly, just worn. She looked up and saw him. Something moved across her face. Too many things at once. "Andre," She managed a small smile. "Hey, hey," he said. "Nothing sharp in it. Nothing cold." "You look good," she said. The words came out careful, like she'd tested them first. "Thanks." He meant it without weight. She opened her mouth like there was more she wanted to say. Something about how things were, maybe. Or how things could have gone differently. Her eyes searched his face for an opening. He held the moment for exactly as long as it deserved. Then he placed his item in the cart, gave her a brief, genuine nod, and walked on. No anger, no backward glance. Just a man with somewhere to be and no reason to linger. Patience had never been his burden. It had always been his sharpest tool. And he was done using it on this. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.